obviously we agree that a huge chunk of that is the military industrial complex and the amount of money that goes to them. And, that's something that we know is the reason we're in perpetual war. It's very profitable. It's extremely profitable. And so they're always going to find a reason. There's always going to be a weapons of mass destruction. I was, by the way, then, I'm a lot older. And so then I remember thinking, there's no weapons of mass destruction. This is ridiculous. This is just a pretense. And I feel like I live in Groundhog Day.
Yeah, you do, because we are.
Right? Isn't it like that?
It's just false flag after false flag and lie after lie and psyop after psyop. I mean, that's what the Russia-Ukraine situation is. I've done an episode of my show called The War They Wanted. If anybody wants to go check it out. Unfortunately, I got nuked from YouTube, so you'll have to find it on audio only. But it is the entire history of 2014 up to the present, when you get to see John McCain and Lindsey Graham over in Ukraine in 2018 talking about next year's the war of offense, and the war of offense being a civil war and the bombing of the East in the Donbass region. It's like, look, this has been a provocation from the West, and you have to be out of your goddamn mind not to see it. So that doesn't mean that Putin's a good guy, and that doesn't mean that he's justified in doing what he's doing.
Clint, you're introducing nuance into the conversation.
We don't allow nuance.
I'm going to be nuanced. I don't care.
No, we've said that often. Both things can be true. Yes. I can disagree with Putin invading Ukraine, and I can also recognize that I always compare it to the little brother in the back of the car going, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And then eventually the older brother snaps and breaks the kid's finger. And then that's the bad guy.
And then the parent's mad at the kid. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's what I see here. And again, I'm not suggesting that it's okay and the people in Ukraine should just be screwed. At this point, though, to not acknowledge our part in it is why we keep having Groundhog Day.
Yes. Yeah. And the gaslighting that goes along with that, where it's like, look, we have it in their own words. We have it in their own words of them saying they wanted this. Like, this is where it was headed all along. You have writers that were, or not writers, but you have, I forget his name. He was in the political class that went on, I think it was the Colbert Report, saying like, look, we've been doing this right under Putin's nose, and the only reason we don't advertise it is because we don't want him to flip out and invade Ukraine. Like, they admitted it. Like, this was the whole thing. They didn't necessarily want Putin to invade, but they very much wanted to control Ukraine to undermine Putin's, sphere of influence. It's just crystal clear. Like, you'd have to be out of your mind not to want to do that, but it still is evil to do it. And it's okay for the American people who don't want to die in nuclear hellfire to say, you guys catalyze this conflict. You cannot clean your hands of it. And you certainly can't then turn around and rob me blind for the rest of my fucking life, all in hopes that you can maintain what ultimately is a slush fund for corruption in Ukraine. Everybody knows it. It's been like that forever. It's one of the most corrupt countries in Europe, or the world, really, politically. So it's just tragic. It's tragic that people have been so indoctrinated. They have no idea of the reality of the situation. They think that they've been totally put into these tribalistic camps where it's like, well, we have to defend democracy. Defend democracy in Ukraine, or the country that had a coup in 2014. Like, what are we even talking about here? It's just catchphrases and lies, and no one has a clue what's actually transpiring unless you've dug really, really deep. And if you have, then you're labeled as Russian misinformation, and you're labeled as a Putin apologist, and you're labeled as a fascist. And it's infuriating. So yes, I agree with you. Groundhog Day is a good way to describe it.
It is. And something that you said before that I find interesting was when you refer to somebody like Gavin Newsom as a fascist, and it's one of the reasons you relocated to Florida. And what's so ironic to me are the amount of people in the Democratic Party here that refer to Ron DeSantis as a fascist.
Of course.
But he's and when you look at it by definition, the things he's done is not that, in a sense, when you say, well, yeah, he didn't lock down. Right. He didn't do that. Like, that was what really impeded people's constitutional rights. Like, there are things like that. I mean, I can only say this so far before I'm labeled a DeSantis lover.
He's very authoritarian when it comes to the culture war. Now, there are many reasons why he's doing that.
Yes.
He's definitely running for president. It's just a question of when he's going to get in the race.
Yeah.
And I think that when you hone in on these very specific areas, like what is being taught in the classroom, what isn't being taught in the classroom.
That's where he's getting a little too invasive.
And to me, one of the big problems we have in the state of Florida is we have a charter school industrial complex where the public school systems have been drastically destroyed. And this comes, from the fact that the Democratic Party in the state is completely feckless.
California has way better schools than we do.
And I wouldn't even use California as an example.
Maybe.
No,
I know they do.
Well, a state that's very conservative that has an excellent school system is Utah. Use Utah as an example of a state that doesn't have this type of nonsense. In Florida, it gets to the forefront because the culture war for a lot of people is a way of making a lot of money. There is a way to figure out how to push certain buttons and tell people, you're going to teach this, you're going to do that. For us, it really, at least for me personally, it comes down to what you're learning in the classroom in the public school is up to you, the parents, and the school board to decide what is in your best interest. There is an infringement component that I do believe DeSantis has been running with, but I also believe he's doing it because he's going to do what he's going to do. And then once he's in the presidential race, obviously he's not going to pay any attention to what this is anymore because his priority is not going to be Florida. It's going to be South Carolina. It's going to be New Hampshire. It's going to be Iowa. It's going to be a whole different slew of things. But I think ultimately the economic war is where we need to have our primary focus. And right now it's not there. And to me, that's very dangerous considering the times we're living in right now.
Well, I think if you're going to deal with the economic circumstances, you have to focus on the Federal Reserve, and no one on any political stripe is discussing that whatsoever, which is why, once again, I'm a libertarian, because it's the most important thing and no one gives a shit about it, and it drives me out of my mind. Because I was a mortgage broker, I really understand the power of interest rates deeply. And like people just don't get it. And on top of that, they have control over M2. They like the money supply. Like it's insane that people just like accept that. Like, oh yeah, of course the fucking federal government or some allegedly, quasi-private institution should have control over how much money exists and the interest rate at which you can borrow it. Like it's crazy. But I wanted to get back to DeSantis. I'm not a fan of his. Believe it or not. Like, I think that if he were to run for president, I probably wouldn't vote for him. I think that he has neoconservative tendencies that concern me greatly. His bills against anti-Semitic hate speech nonsense is terrible, and it's counter to free speech, which I believe in deeply. And obviously, I love Jewish people. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Yeah. I just don't want you to be able to curtail my speech if I were to say something about Israel. Fuck you is what I have to say to that. So, I think that he's not a good president, candidate. I think that he's probably largely fraudulent, and he's probably playing into the conservative culture war. But I would caution you guys about ignoring their genuine complaints about the culture war when it comes to the schooling curriculum. I personally am concerned by it too. I think that there is a tremendous problem with much of the intersectionality that's being taught in elementary school in particular. If you're in college, I don't really give a shit what they teach you at that point. But if you're teaching elementary school kids that their skin color matters and that they're different and one's a victim and one's I don't like any of that. And I know it doesn't happen in every school, but to pretend that it's not happening in some is a complete lie. So I don't really want DeSantis involved in setting the curriculum, but I would also like it if they stopped teaching our kids that. So if that's not going to be dealt with on a cultural level, it's going to be dealt with by some strong-armed, right winger.
Authoritarian.
Yeah. So
well, that's the thing. That's where he comes off as authoritarian, and that's the kind of stuff that I don't like. And what we are talking about in specific here, I don't know if you know the whole AP course, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is not a required course. It's an AP level high school course, which is essentially a college course, because if you get the AP credit, it's a college level course. And it's not something that you're required to take. And the fact that this is a national program that scholars and people who are historians and people have actually put together to teach, that the fact that he would flat out reject that, it's one of those things where how I used to think of Arizona, like purposefully not celebrating Martin Luther King Day. It's kind of like, we're just saying that if it's a national program, it should be afforded to the students in our schools at an AP level.
I honestly, I don't know enough about it to say. Yeah. And if it's an AP level, does that mean high school or college?
It's high school, but right. When you take it, you get college credit. It's considered collegiate level course.
Yeah, I should have remembered that. I took AP classes. I just forgot because it's been so long. I think that kids in high school are better prepared to deal with some bad ideas, which I think that there may be some bad ideas in this curriculum personally. However, it's my greatest concern though is really the middle school, elementary kids. Like the fact that you have, and whether it's curriculum or not is kind of separate from the point. You have teachers that are going to what I believe are largely Marxist indoctrination centers, which is our academia at this point, and they come out deeply believing that the like racial divides and or the way we alleviate the historical injustice of racism is to focus on our skin color today. And I just could not disagree with that more. And I think that it's really backwards and sick, and it's going to destroy our country. And I really believe that. And, you know, until people like start to really have some consideration for the people that are concerned about this curriculum, you're going to end up with these strong-armed, you know, right wingers that come down like an anvil. And I don't know. I don't know how we have a meeting of the minds on this one, honestly. You know, obviously I'm a private schooling, homeschooling type of guy because that's what libertarians believe in. But aside from that, as long as we have public schools and we're indoctrinating kids into what I think is a really counterproductive ideology, I think we're going to suffer terribly. So it's complicated.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.